For years, there's been this backlash against creators changing established characters from either one gender to another or from one race to another, from Doctor Who's first female Doctor to the recently revealed Lord of the Rings series on Amazon, with black people as elves and dwarves. Apparently, this is huge news, and I gotta say, who the fuck cares? No, seriously. I understand the argument against forced diversity and inclusion when it's so obviously not inclusive to a demographic the creator doesn't like. That's not the issue I have. The issue I have is railing against creators that are trying new things. And when it mostly comes down to it, the new things people seem to cry about the most is gender and race swapping. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, it's much ado about nothing. As long as the fundamentals of the character aren't changed, there is more than enough room for an alternate universe or a reboot of a series where James Bond is black, or Superman is black, or even Booster Gold is black. He's one of my favorite actors, and he could definitely play a great Booster Gold with the right script and director. Or even where an elf could be black. Who cares? Does it change the story in any way? Are the characters suddenly going to start talking like they came from the 1940s, speaking some stereotypical slang?
Is you will or is you ain't my baby?
No? Then why should I worry about it? For a long time, no one had a problem with Idris Elba being looked at to play James Bond, and I think he would have been amazing with the character. His race has nothing to do with the character of James Bond. Nothing about Bond needs to be Caucasian, other than that's the traditional way he's been written. As long as the fundamental writing of the character is the same, then no one would really be upset by it, aside from some diehard fanatics. I mean, the first and best James Bond was Scottish, not British, and no one cared. As long as the character isn't fundamentally changed, that betrays the concept, then I feel it's a nice change that could and should be explored. Take the first female Doctor on Doctor Who. Right from the start, I knew it would be a horrible decision, as the core essence of the Doctor was masculine. It would take a brilliant writer to evolve the character towards a female Doctor. They were already hinting at it with Missy in Capaldi's era of the show, and while it never sat completely right with me, Missy did keep some of the characteristics of the Master, and it was an okay change. Although having said that, Missy was definitely a different tone than the original Master. There was a more delicate approach that the actress took, a much more feminine attitude that could have been played better had Missy been the Ranai instead. But a bad guy is a bad guy, and having the bad guy be a woman makes no difference to the core of the show. It's just weird, but I can deal with it. Changing the Doctor into a woman changes the very core of the show, and the show would have to adopt a more feminine approach. Otherwise, you get an actress imitating the last few actors instead of being her own Doctor and the driving force of the show. This is completely the fault of the writers for not changing the dynamic of the show to fit the changes that they made. Shoehorning in a female and saying we did it and that there's nothing else to be done is lazy writing, and we see the effect that it had on the series. The audience left Doctor Who not because it was a female Doctor, but because the writing was terrible and didn't take into account how a female changes the dynamic of the show. They just made Jodie run around like Matt Smith everywhere through storylines that made even less sense. So when I see that people are upset that The Lord of the Rings has black characters in the show, I'm like, okay, but does it change the tone of the franchise? Is this fundamentally changing the franchise into something different? Or is it just a skin tone? The arguments against Snow White being darker in the remake makes much more sense than this. She's Snow White for a reason. Her being white is a character trait that forms the title. But maybe I'm wrong, as I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan, so I can't really comment on the intricacies of the characters. But is the skin color a characteristic that needs to be a certain way? Is it like the Morlocks from the Time Machine, who need to be pale because they live underground, away from the sun, unlike the Eloi who are tan? Or is it not important the way that James Bond doesn't really need to be Caucasian for the character to still be the same? I understand that people don't like it when creators needlessly change characters, especially something that has been visually defining for decades. I get that. No one should feel like they have to change the character for a quota or for an agenda of diversity and inclusivity, to get brownie points from a Twitter mob. But if they really want to try something new with the character, because they want to explore the subtle changes that those differences bring, I really don't mind it. Because then the story being told will be the first thing on their mind and not an agenda that has to be forced. But I can hear you saying, if they changed James Bond to a black guy, wouldn't they try and add racism into the story? And they might. And in some cases, it could be something that adds to the story, especially if they made it set in the 1960s like the originals. But if it was modern day, it would still feel shoehorned in and silly. Like, here we go with the racism stuff again. We get it, he's black. Move on with the story. If it doesn't add to the overall story and changes the direction of the franchise away from the core ideals, then I agree with all of the arguments made against those decisions. And I do agree that new characters should be made instead of trying to fiddle with established characters because they want to force a diversity quota. It's lazy and it's disrespectful to the audience. And it's not like people are against more diverse characters being brought into the mix. It's that they should be their own characters and not replacing the ones we already have. Although some characters that people love really get close to that line, but they get a pass anyway because the writing is well done and the storylines define them as their own thing. Miles Morales is the most recent that I can think of that does his own thing without stepping on Spider-Man's toes. It's awfully close, and no one will really say that he's the real Spider-Man that we grew up with. But no one dislikes Miles Morales. He's not Peter Parker, but it's not shoved in your face that he's replacing Peter. They give respect to Peter Parker, at least from what I've seen in the video games, and Miles is his own character. It works, and it paid off for Marvel. And it's not like there aren't a long line of diverse characters from the past that could be brought back. But to take existing characters that are doing well and screwing with the formula, it's never really going to end well. Has no one learned from New Coke? Don't try and change things that don't need to be changed. Make it its own thing, and make it the best that you can make it. Good characters, good stories. You have more freedom to do new things, and to tell the stories that you want to tell, whatever your agenda is, if you aren't using an established character. This is why many new writers get backlash, because they're messing with characters that are already finished. There's nothing left to add to them. Make something new. A clean canvas to tell your stories and ideas. The problem with that is, if your stories suck, there's nothing to fall back on. You can't blame haters, and you can't use the good name of an established character to trick someone into buying your bad story. So when you tell someone to not buy your book, well...
And if you don't like my politics, don't buy my book.
They won't, and it will be all your fault anyway, because you disrespected established fans instead of creating new fans with your own characters and stories. Look, if you're gonna suck, at least suck with some dignity. Don't hide behind good characters to tell bad stories. You'll fail every time, and you'll never learn to get better. It's the whole reason why the comic industry is failing. Get good, comic industry. Get good.
Get good. Get good, you fucking shit fucking bitch.
So all of this to say that I don't really mind it when they switch things up, as long as they're going to tell a good story. And if it doesn't change what was already established with the characters, someone's skin tone doesn't really matter. And if you must gender swap a character, you have to take that into account when writing a story, because that will change the entire tone going forward. But if you're a lazy writer, none of this means anything, and the old adage of get woke, go broke will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But that's my 2 cents. I hope I made sense, enough for you to give me that like, subscribe to watch my new videos, and to make me feel like being on YouTube is still worth it. Till next time.